Hello everybody, Realm Builder Guy here, and welcome back to the channel and a new Crusader Kings 3 guide. As you can see from the thumbnail and the heading, today it is all about the Vikings, and of course for that I'm going with the 867 start. But there are a few little housekeeping things I need to talk about before we get into the guide proper. First of all, don't forget to hit a like if you are not a subscriber yet, and statistically, according to my YouTube analytics, the majority of people watching these guides are not subscribed. So if you don't want to miss any Crusader Kings 3 content, be that regional guides, game mechanic guides, tips, tricks, let's plays, or any other grand strategy, history, RPG, wargaming, anything like that here from the channel, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and maybe even click the little bell so you don't miss anything. All right, now getting into today's guide about the Vikings. In previous guides, I have already spoken about the Norsemen of the British Isles, so I'm not going to talk about them. You can check out my Britain in 867 guide for that. I'm also not going to talk about the Norse over here in Russia, or down here in, let's call it Brittany, southern Brittany. I've spoken, not talking is not good English. I have spoken about them in previous guides as well on Fun Starts in 867, so you can check them out there. Instead, we are going to focus just on this geography here of Scandinavia. And I'm only going to focus in on those of actual Norse culture. So the more Finno-Ugric tribes above here, the Sami tribes and so on, I am not going to talk about you. Sorry. We're going to focus on the Norsemen and women of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Iceland today. So now let's get into it. So obviously one of the bigger themes when it comes to the Norse and the Vikings here in Crusader Kings 3 is the general theme of Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons. I had previously spoken about, why do I always want to say talking about? I had previously covered Ivar the Boneless, Ubbe, and Fitzek or Halfdan over in the British Isles. So we're not going to talk about them today. We're going to have two other fabled sons of Ragnar that we will talk about. But just a little bit of a caveat now in general about how Norse history in the early Middle Ages is A, covered in general, and B, here in the game. Now, most of the history you find during the research about it is from two main general sources. It's either written a few centuries after the events by chroniclers from Scandinavia in the form of sagas. So obviously this is oral history written down of legendary and mythological tales of the past. So needless to say, they are a little bit embellished to the positive side. Or you get chroniclers, also a few centuries later, like Adam von Bremen, who, don't have a very positive spin on the peoples of Scandinavia. So you kind of got to find something in the middle. Now, Crusader Kings 3 is obviously a game for fun and storytelling. The fabled and oftentimes highly disputed Ragnar Lothbrok and his sons are covered here in the game because why not? It's really fun to play the what if. I mean, there's circumstantial evidence about some of them. There's hard evidence about other ones. There is the fact, and we're going to get into this with the first one here we talk about in a second, that oftentimes a real life person was then changed to be a fabled son of Ragnar and so on. So it's going to be a little bit of mixture of real history here, as well as kind of fabled lore. So it's going to feel a little bit more like a lore video. I mean, I guess in general, a lot of these CK3 regional historical guides that I do are a little bit more like lore, but you get what I am going for. Structurally, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off here in what is Denmark, then we're going to move to Sweden, Norway, and then hop over the ocean over to Iceland. So now, let's go to Denmark. So in Denmark, you really have two major holdings. You have Sjælland, if I am even remotely pronouncing that right, Sjælland, or Jylland, over here on the mainland of Denmark, or the islands and mainland of Sweden. In Sjælland, you have one of the fabled sons of Ragnar, Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Now, he was also part of the great heathen army that went over to the British Isles and avenged the death of his father by also murdering King Ella of Northumbria. What makes things a little bit awkward here in the game is that he is actually married to Blea, who is Ella's daughter. So, but no, she has no claims, so, you know, can't pull that card, but that would have been a lot of fun, wouldn't it? So, other than that, there's not a ton really spoken about Mr. Snake in the Eye. He is oftentimes switched with the actual Danish king Siegfried, who died in West Francia in 887. So that's kind of the era of death for Sigurd as well. So it's kind of questioned whether or not it's a real person renamed or completely made up. The nice thing about him is he does have a few vassals, so you can control a few people. But where do you go with Sigurd Snake in the Eye? You are now back in Scandinavia. You are no longer in Britain. You left your brothers Ivar, Ubbe, and Halfdan / Fitzek behind to come back home and take over some lands from your father. The same thing your other brother Björn Ironside did as well, which we will get into a little bit later on. So what do? Well, the first target is unify Denmark. That is what Sigurd famously did, or Siegfried, depending on which source you believe. Unify Denmark into one kingdom. The nice thing is you're only taking on Bagsecg, who I'll talk about in a second as well, who is in his own right a great Norse hero. But he's got no allies really to speak much of. He's got a pretty small army. You've got a slightly bigger army. You've got some vassals. That is your first step, is to go in here and take over Jylland. Now, as far as attributes go, these have changed with every one that I've loaded up. So when I did some research and kind of looked in, he had a prowess of 16. Now it's 8. But these up here have stayed the same, especially a Viking, Novice Hunter, and Fortune Builder. Those have stayed the same. His wife, however, has changed. So Sigurd seems to stay pretty constant. So after you take over Denmark, the next thing you want to do is probably expand into southern Sweden and then start pressing your claims against your brother Björn for the rest of Sweden. The next guy is the other contender for the throne of Denmark, and that is Bagsecg Eiriksson of Jylland. Now, he is also a true historical character. Now, he is actually a historical character. He was a joint leader of the great army that invaded Wessex in 870 together with Halfdan. Now, he actually died in Wessex at the Battle of Ashdown in 871, so just a few years after this start date. Beyond that, his background is largely unknown, even though he plays a very prominent role in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles as one of the great conquerors of Britain. But other than that, there's not a lot known. So what if you don't want to be Mr. Snake in the Eye? Instead, you want to go for Bagsecg. Well, your expansions are pretty much the same. Go and attack Sigurd. Now, he's pretty strong, so you might want to look at a few other allies in Scandinavia, especially behind Mr. Snake in the Eye, to kind of, surround him a little bit. The other way you can go is, of course, into northern Germany, East Francia or Lübeck, and take over some lands there as well and kind of expand your base down here. Odds are all of this stuff down here is going to go to hell in a handbasket pretty damn fast. So that is an opportunity to go in, sweep in, and take some lands. In general, that's not a bad play even for Sigurd. If this starts breaking up East Francia, which tends to happen pretty early on, I would immediately try to take this right here, especially Dithmarschen. It's not Dithmarschen, it's Dithmarschen, The H is silent. It's not a TH sound like in English. It's just dit. Because you've got a pretty good border then to defend as well. So, the other thing you can do with him is, of course, move north or start raiding again the British Isles and look towards East Anglia is probably the weakest one you could go after. But that is Denmark. Not a lot to say about Denmark early on, but now we've got a very interesting person to talk about. So next up is the famous Björn Ironside. That is right, the big guy himself, Björn. Again, here, all of these attributes stay the same, so his traits, but down here, these have changed. If you could load this one up, that would be great, because you're not just a great diplomat, a great marshal, you also have 19 prowess, so yeah, that's a pretty good fighter there. Now, Björn Ironside is another fabled son of Ragnar, and he was supposedly the first king of Sweden and the founder of the Munse dynasty. Now, that is very speculative. It is questioned over and over again, and a lot of modern historians say that he may not have existed, and even if he did, didn't found, wasn't the first king of Sweden. But for the sake of storytelling, it's just much more fun. Now, his descendants ruled actually as kings of Sweden until 1060 for almost 200 years from the start date here in 867. He was also a key figure in the raids of West Francia and the plundering of Paris in the 850s. Of course, he was also part of the Great Heathen Army that conquered, or that invaded the British Isles, conquered York, and slew King Ella of Northumbria through the fabled Blood Eagle. So that's particularly nasty. If you don't know what the Blood Eagle is, it's, well, let's just say, read up on it. I don't need to talk about it here on YouTube because I don't need to get demonetized. He's also fabled for teaming up with the other great Norse raider, Mr. Heston. Him and Heston actually raided all throughout the Mediterranean. They sailed around here and kind of raided both the Iberian coast and the North African coast, Sicily, Sardinia, and then southern Italy as well, before they returned back. And most of their ships actually perished in storms on their return voyage. So Björn Ironside, why am I saying Ironside, is one of those truly famous Vikings. Now, you do have a claim, but that is part of your land. You've got a pretty strong army. You are currently at war in Northumbria against King Ella, and you hold, obviously, multiple titles, including the Jarldom of Uppland, which is a duchy tier realm. So what do you do with Björn Ironside? Seriously, Björn Ironside. Well, you try to finish up the conquest of the British Isles and destruction of Northumbria, because that is the storyline that simply makes the most sense. You're a son of Ragnar. You're actually, according to the show Vikings, you're the first son of Ragnar. So you'd want to avenge his death. Now, say you've done all your duty there. What's the next thing? Well, you want to conquer as much of Sweden as you possibly can, so everything in here, and create the Kingdom of Sweden and actually become the Munse dynasty, the first king of Sweden. That is the direction I would personally go. And from there, expand out here and just control this entire area. You could, of course, go attack the Norwegians and the Danes, especially as they're still fragmented at this point, but conquering as much of Sweden is really the direction I would lean. Just so you know, I will talk about a general tactic when it comes to the Vikings here towards the end of the video, so you want to stick around to the end there. But that is Björn Ironside. Now we inch our way over to Norway, and here we have Harald Fairhair of Vestfold, famous Yngling and the first king of Norway. Supposedly, he ruled from 872 until 930, even though some people say that he never actually existed. Now, he was very dedicated to the unification of Norway, so much so that he would not cut his hair until he was king of all of Norway. His first major conquest, though, was actually in Sweden, Värmland, right next door. Just kind of a side thing there. His opponents actually fled Norway and to the islands out here. So the Faroe Islands, Orkney Islands, Shetland Islands, and Iceland themselves. And to make sure that they could not harass his rule any further, he actually went out and sent some of his vassals or himself to go out there and conquer those islands in the name of Norway. So he was supposedly the reason why Iceland got settled, but again, a lot of that is saga and fable. The last 3 years of his life, he actually co-ruled with his son, Eric Bloodaxe. Now, here in the game, he has no children yet. He has a young wife who is 17. He himself is only 17. He is quick. He is a novice hunter, flexible leader. In general, a fantastic start. This would be one that I highly recommend. If you want to do a true, from a county level up to a king or empire with a true, fabled, semi-historical, semi-lore character, Harald Fairhair is really the way to go. And the way you go about that is you have all these independent or small little neighbors around you, like for instance this one here in Telemark. You just go there and you take them over, or Telemark, because they're much smaller, and so you grow bit by bit by bit, conquering all of the Norwegian lands until you become that king of Norway. It's only then that I would really worry about maybe conquering the rest of Scandinavia or Iceland or the British Isles. Goal number one is to conquer Norway and maybe make some allies of equally sized Norwegian counts or petty kings or chiefs. So that is Harald Fairhair. So now that we have some of the major people covered from the show Vikings, we're going to go into some of those that are lesser well known, but extremely important for the history of Viking Scandinavia. And we're going up here to Naumdaelfylki, sure. But I'm not going to worry about Gjortgard, who was a true historical character, but instead to his son, Håkon. Håkon was a very close ally with Harald Fairhair after they actually battled it out. So he took over for his father, had a battle with Harald Fairhair, and it was a tie. And they said, let's work together. And he then helped Harald Fairhair conquer the rest of Norway. Now, in general, it's a pretty small realm. If he dies, the primary heir here, of course, is Håkon. And Håkon would be one that I would then play. He's unlanded right now, but you may as well start with Dad, who's 77. He's probably going to croak pretty soon. And then you can be Håkon. This would be a very, very interesting campaign. You'd immediately want to try to conquer lands to the north and to the south. I'd probably, looking at these, go south first. They're a little bit weaker, and maybe add a neighbor as an ally. For instance, these guys right here. Now, the problem, of course, you start as Grotgard, is that you're 77 years old, you're not married, and you only have one child. Marry Håkon right away, as fast as possible. He needs to produce heirs before that all falls apart. Now, you're not super well known, you don't have a lot of money. It's a very hard start, but it's a very interesting start. Now we're going to move just south of there to Rögnvaldr in Trondheimer, so Trondheim. He was actually, historically speaking, even though it's not replicated in the game, a relative and ally of Harald Fairhair. He was credited actually with the founding of Norse Orkney. So the Orkney Islands, he is the founder of the Earldom of Orkney, and his descendants ruled there for centuries. Now, he is one of those vassals that I referenced earlier that Harald Fairhair sent out and said, kick out the disloyal ones and you can have those lands. And he did. And it's a very important character, and he supposedly really did exist. But I'm not going to focus on him. Now, he's 37 years old, would be a fun one to play as. Not married, you got a bunch of kids, so, you know, this is one that could last a while. Here, too, you want to conquer the smaller, weaker realms around you. You are one of them, but ally smartly, and you can do that. But the one I want to focus on is right here. Hrolfr. Now, Hrolfr, according to the research that I did, it is suggested that he is Rollo. That's right, that Rollo. The Rollo who settled in northern France after pillaging there and founded the Duchy and House of Normandy, and of course, from whence William the Bastard / William the Conqueror descends. So this would be the interesting play for me, is to see if you can be the Rollo. Now, in the Vikings show on the History Channel, Rollo is made out to be Ragnar's brother, which he absolutely historically wasn't. Rollo did exist historically. He did found the Duchy of Normandy after allying with the King of West Francia to kind of help him against the Norman incursion or Norse incursion. So this is a real historical character, and it's suggested that he is Rögnvaldr's son, who of course founded the earldom of Orkney. Rögnvaldr was in fact killed by one of Fairhair's sons in around 890. That son then fled, and he was eventually killed, and because of, you know, revenge and all, by Rollo himself. So this is a really historically intriguing, very difficult start because you were one of the weaker ones. You've got virtually no money. You've got a very small army, very few champions. You're not a, you know, great starter, starting character, but you have the potential for a really interesting storyline. So here too, I would try to get close with Harald Fairhair. Now, he doesn't have any kids yet, so you may have to wait, but you've got plenty of kids that you can marry around, form some alliances to be strong enough to take out some of your weaker neighbors. Now we're heading a bit down the coast to Oster-Agdir, and here we have Kjotve. Now, Kjotve was a long time, also known as Kjotve the Rich, of Harald Fairhair. Now, he's not very rich here in the start, but he's got an okay army. But he was a major adversary for Harald Fairhair. Now, his son, Tore, right here, was a famous berserker. Now, that's not necessarily replicated here, but in a major battle against Harald Fairhair, where Harald Fairhair came out here to conquer this part of Norway, they lost, Tore died, and Kjotve left. Now, the interesting thing about Kjotve isn't necessarily the start. Now, you know, unfortunately, Berserker is not a trait this guy has, otherwise that would be a fun one. But if you're going to play him, you know, do the same as everybody else. Ally with some powerful other Vikings, and then conquer the less powerful around you. But the interesting side note of Kjotve is that he was actually featured in a different game. In fact, he was featured in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and he is that first main assassination target, I believe called Kjotve the Cruel. But that is who this is. So just kind of an interesting side note. Of these interesting Norwegian characters, I would say he's probably the least interesting out of all of them. And now we have landed in Iceland with Gardar of Österland. Now, Gardar Svavarsson was a Swedish Viking that settled Iceland. In fact, he was on his way to the British Isles, and a storm diverted his ship quite a ways off course, and he was the supposed second person to ever set foot on Iceland. He's also known as the first one to circumnavigate Iceland. So this is the original, let's call him major settler of Iceland. So if you're going to be Gardar, of course, you want to go after Vesterland and then the islands. But if I'm going to pick someone up here in Iceland to play, it's actually his neighbor. Now, his neighbor is I personally believe, one of the most intriguing characters in the Viking world in CK3 here in 867. And that is Chiefess Audr the Deep-Minded of Vesterland. Now, the name is a little bit misleading. Now, they went with Audr with an R, but there's also Odd. Now, Audr the Deep-Minded is the legendary Norse princess and was mother to Harald Wartooth. But she technically lived about 100, 200 years before this lady. Now, this lady, Audr the Deep-Minded, in reality, she was the daughter of Ketil Flatnose. Ketil Flatnose is this gentleman down here. Where is Ketil? Why, he is the ruler of the earldom of Man, so the island of Man. Very, very interesting. She is also the widow of Olaf the White, the former king or earl of Dublin. Her son, interesting enough, is Thorstein the Red, who conquered northern Scotland. Now, the interesting thing about her is she was one of the most prominent women in Norse saga history. She captained her own ship. So after the death of her husband, she decided to leave and captained her own ship, crewed entirely by men who were completely loyal to her. And it's able that they were all more loyal to her than to her husband, but let's just say they were all loyal to her in that moment. And she said, "We are going to the north." They went to Iceland. She conquered that side of Iceland. And here's the other interesting thing. She's Catholic. Everybody else I've covered has been pagan. She is Catholic. She was one of the first ones to be baptized a Christian, and she is actually the one who led to the entire Christianization of Iceland much sooner than some other areas. So she would be very interesting. She has a number of kids, and of course, who doesn't like Thorstein the Red, even though he looks pretty blonde here. But for me, this is a really interesting start. Now, you will have a difficult fight on your hands against your neighbor because your armies are pretty equally matched. And even if you have an ally outside, odds are you're not really going to be able to get them there in time. Maybe ally with your father, maybe one of the Vikings from the British Isles will come up north, maybe not. But if you can unify Iceland, you can start island hopping and conquer all of this little stuff here and start moving your way into the British Isles and Ireland. That is the most logical direction you could go. And the other one, of course, is here, the Norwegian coast. But that's really where I would go first. It's a difficult start simply because you're a bit out there and you have to conquer Australand to do anything, and you have to strike as soon as you possibly can. Nice thing is with her, at least I've loaded this now twice, so I assume it continues quick. So if she continues to have that, then all future children, I think it's a little shame that her kids she starts with don't have that inheritable trait, will have that. And you're only 34, so of course you can marry again and produce a few more children. But this is one of the most interesting starts in all of Viking Norse CK3. So that kind of concludes all the different interesting starts you could do in the Scandinavian Viking world. Now, I mentioned that I want to talk about, in general, a strategy you should pursue no matter which start you decide to do. And that is make raiding a key component of your economy. You can make so much money by being strategic in your raiding. Now, it may not be the first thing you do. You may want to consolidate some power, say Denmark or Sweden or Norway or Iceland. Once you've done that, really focus on raiding as a major part of income. You have the British Isles you can raid. You have the coasts of, Lotharingia, East Francia, West Francia, Brittany that you can raid. There's so many places you can go. You can even replicate what Björn Ironside did and go to Iberia, North Africa, Italy. There are so many great options, but raiding is a key component that I would highly recommend you do. So, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe if you're new so you don't miss any other future fun content about Crusader Kings 3 or any other game here on the channel. Don't forget to check out the links in the description where you can find a link to my Nexus GG store where you can buy Crusader Kings 3 and support the channel, as well as a number of other games. Also, thank you to the patrons that have been supporting the channel. You can find a link to that in the description, as well as our growing Discord, my Twitch channel. Yes, I will stream at some point. And my Twitter account as well, where you can follow me there, where I just kind of ramble on. So, until next time, I am Realm Builder Guy, and I will talk to you soon.